You know what you need? You need theme music.
The cat is staring at me.
Maybe. Hey guys, Dave from Nerdarchy, for nerds, by nerds, and today I have with me Kelly Slagle, Seth Polanski, and Brian Stillman, and you guys are all kind of like D&D and movie folks.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
Those are adjectives that apply.
Yeah. So you guys have a Kickstarter going on right now because you're working on a documentary, Eye of the Beholder: The Art of D&D. I mean, we've had you guys on a few times to talk about it. It's a really cool project. And Nerdarchy is so happy that we ran into Brian when we went on the fantasy cruise, and we were kind of like doing our research to see what was there, and we were like, "Eye of the Beholder, Art of D&D, that is right up our alley."
And we were like, gamers, that is right up our alley, so we don't have to hang out with the rest of these weirdos on this cruise.
Yeah, and then I creepily stalked Brian in one of the galleys. I happened to be sitting there having lunch. And
I didn't find it creepy. I found it like, hey, I'm loved by someone. Loved a little too closely, but loved nonetheless.
But in all fairness, someone had creepily stalked him first.
Really?
And I heard them talking about D&D at the table over. And then I looked over and I'm like, hey, wait a minute. I think I know who that guy is. And then I found a way to insert myself in the conversation. And that's basically how we met.
Pretty much.
Very much like we are being creepily stalked by our cat right now.
There's a cat right there. I just
And then, one time I was having sound issues and I was like, hey, does anybody know anything? And Brian's like, I know a guy. and Seth, it was so cool. Like, next thing I know, within 5 minutes, I was on a Skype call and he was like walking me through some things. So a bunch of super great people. And, I'm glad to have met you guys and I consider you friends. And Nerdarchy is like fully supporting this project because it's an awesome project. But these are also literally friends of Nerdarchy. So I want you guys to check it out. Links are in the description on the YouTube page. And hey, even if it's not something you can back right now, please share it out there and help us get the word out.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you in advance.
With that, why don't you guys tell us about the project? What are you guys working on?
Well, it's a documentary called Eye of the Beholder: The Art of D&D. We feel that's pretty self-explanatory. It grows out of all of our love as gamers and fans and filmmakers. Sort of combining that all together to explore the art, the artists, where these sort of visuals come from that are such an important part of the game. A lot of people, a lot has been written about D&D over the years, or gaming, role-playing games and stuff. And it all seems to be about the mechanics and about the history of the game and everything else about sort of the play side of it. And it occurred to us that when we were kids, when we were growing up, the visuals were just as important. And there's nothing really that's been said about that in any sort of a way that sort of collects all this knowledge and all this information. So we figured, hey, we're just crazy enough to do it. I reached out to Seth and Kelly because they're filmmakers, and I was like, "Do you want to do this?"
And it was also an excuse to run around the world for the last 3 years and meet all these artists that we always wanted to meet. So there's a little bit of that going on in the background too.
Total fanboy girling going on.
Yeah, it's I've been a journalist for 20 some odd years, and I've interviewed movie stars and rock stars and authors and politicians. I mean, you name it, I've done interviews. And this one has been one of the hardest for me to hold it together as a professional, not freak out and be like, oh my God, you're Jeff Easley, you're Larry Elmore, you're whoever, and just like kind of losing it a tiny bit. I've mostly maintained it.
I didn't try to hug Brom, I swear.
No, Madame was not fawning over Brom. It was so cute.
There's some close calls there, Kelly, where really
I know.
I'm still pretty sure that while you're editing, you're like cuddling up against the computer while he's on screen.
Yeah, there's a good thing there's not a camera there.
now in my mind, in my head canon, I have Brom trying to escape as Kelly's crawled around his leg like a little kid. And maybe Seth on the other leg. Which, guys, that's a scary thought because you folks are large folks. You're very tall.
One of the funniest things about, and here's part of the tech side of things, since I'm the audio guy, right? I didn't go on some of the interviews. I wasn't there. Kelly wasn't there. But when you edit somebody for a week, it's like you're their friend. It's like you know them. I have listened to this person speak for a week solid.
I-
I was there, but no, I wasn't actually there. I never met them. They don't know who I am. And I'm going to walk up to one of these people, I guarantee it, one of these days, and be like, wow, hey, I loved it when you said this thing. And they're going to look at me like I'm nuts.
As an editor, I've done this before, and I walked up to people and said, "Hey, how you doing?" And they look at me like, "Hi, what's up?" And I'm like, "But oh, right, I've just edited you for 40 hours. You have no idea who I am." And so I have a feeling I'm going to run up to Jeff D. or well, easily I've met, but Jeff D. or Larry Elmore, for God's sake, I'm going to walk up to and just be like, "Oh my God, hi!" And he's going to just call for security. It'll be great. It'll be great.
That's funny because while I've done a bunch of editing, I do not call myself an editor. And I have a totally different experience with editing. It's made me loathe myself for my speech and speaking patterns, and my partners as well.
Oh, well, do you only edit yourself? That's the problem.
Yeah, I only edit us. It's just filled me with self-loathing. And for my partners as well, I'm like, why can't you freaking speak like human beings?
Yep. Wait, and next time you do it, if you want to really hate yourself, count the number of times you say like or
Ugh.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. The knows, we do a lot of those. I guess there's some like East Coast stuff that we use a lot of excessively, and
there's definitely like some East Coast stuff.
Yeah,
it is totally. Anyway, back to D&D.
Back to D&D.
Yeah. So you guys have rambled off some of the names. How many people are going to be in the documentary?
There are 40 interviews total, but some of those are of multiple people. So I would say there is at least 43 people in the film, possibly. We don't know who's going to end up in the final edit. We're still in post-production. So we've done, interviews of 40 plus people. So there's potential for, a significant amount of those to be in there. So
yeah, it's one of those things we can't say till we really start piecing it together. A lot of people, we ask the same questions. If we interview 4 people, 80% of the questions we ask them are the same. And then the last 20% maybe pertain to them specifically and their experiences specifically, or whatever the ratio is. And you're looking for the person who best answers that larger percentage of questions, or you're looking to have multiple people say the same thing so you can kind of jump from person to person to person to get that single complete answer. So it's you never know quite what's going to go in until you've gone through it all and just seen how they express it, or who said the first part, so you don't want to use them in that next clip because you want them to cut to someone else or whatever.
Editing, yeah.
Yeah, and here's a good example, and I'm not sure it's going to get used in the movie because it may or may not make sense. But as we came down through the years with D&D, there were a lot of how do I put this? Chicks in chainmail and whatnot. And one of the questions I always ask people is, I'm going to say 2 words here, and I'd like your response to it. Chainmail bikini. And we've got a lot of the artists giving a response to that word.
I haven't edited the chainmail bikini timeline yet.
So you can kind of see how you go from there to a laughter, a frown, whatever. And I don't know if it's going to make it into the final, but that's just a good example of one of those questions you ask everybody to see a reaction and to get a sort of a story arc out of it.
Hey, Brian, do you want to go down the list of people in the film?
All of them?
Well, I meant as many as you can name.
Off the top of my head, we've interviewed Jeff D, Diesel LaForce, Janelle Jakeways, Larry Elmore, Jeff Easley, Clyde Caldwell, Todd Lockwood, Brom, Tony DiPolizzi,
Bryn Matheny. Bryn Matheny.
Yeah, Bryn Matheny. Well, I'm going through the old school people first.
Sorry, I didn't realize there was an order.
It's on the website.
Harry Quinn.
Or the Facebook page, or Kickstarter.
It's more fun to let Brian just pull them out of his head.
I like Brian just.
It's a long freaking list. And then as you move through the years, we've got people like Chris Burdett, Chris Seaman, Steve Prescott, Bryn Matheny, Tom Babby. We've got Darlene. We just interviewed Darlene. She's early days of D&D.
Matt Stewicki.
Oh yeah, Matt Stewicki.
Tim Task.
Yep, we interviewed Tim Kask. We interviewed Margaret Weiss. We interviewed Satine Phoenix. We interviewed
John Chinetti.
Oh yeah, John.
Right.
for 4 hours.
That was not an interview. That was an interrogation.
We interviewed
Yes.
Peggy Cooper. She was an early art coordinator at TSR. We really tried to go kind of broad on these things. So it's not just artists. We interviewed a lot of fans and a lot of collectors as well, people who could sort of look at this and talk about why it's so important to them, besides from a professional point of view, besides from a career point of view. People like Pat Wilshire, Chris Arneson, whole bunch of other people. I'm not going to go through this list. This is huge.
Well,
So
I think just
check out our website.
just people an idea. Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
look at the Kickstarter. That's where the whole list is. In
Yeah,
one
that's
big
true.
image.
We've got most of the names listed there in one way or another.
Oh, Donato Giancola, he's
Yep.
he's in it.
There's
Anyway,
so many.
lots of people.
The, the problem with making lists is inevitably you're going to forget somebody,
I
and
feel
then
like
you're going
it-
to feel
Well-
bad.
David, just to give you an idea, we have over 66 hours of footage right now.
Oh, that's a good size for a movie.
Yeah, for an hour and a half film or less.
And she's got to know where in that 66 hours one person says one thing.
which is what I'm in the process of doing right now, is putting it all in my head. So yeah, it's a lot. I mean, it's amazing. You know, I've been going through a lot of the interviews recently, and it's amazing how many times I'm just smiling as I go through the interviews because people have, you know, said the most amazing things to us, and it's you know, really fun stories, really interesting stories, really you know, sometimes not so good stories, but we're not looking for dirt on people. It's just, you know, it's just interesting to hear the whole gamut from these folks. So
Yeah.
So James Leslie, I hope there's going to be an outtakes reel.
there will be extras with more. There's not so many outtakes as it is extended interviews with people that we're going to be sharing, you know, so we can't put 66 hours of footage in the film. It's just not going to happen. So we're going to edit down the interviews to like extended interviews with a lot of folks, and we'll give that out to a lot of our backers and stuff.
The other thing, as time progresses after all that, if after we've done the movie and after we've done the extended interviews on like the DVD and little DVD extras and whatever else we put together with some of that material, if we find we're still sitting on anything interesting, you know, as the weeks and months go on and whatever, we'll probably just end up releasing that as interesting tidbits. If we're like, oh, here's a cool little story,
Yeah.
let's cut it together for 3 minutes and toss it out there for people. We'd love for all the stuff that we've heard to be heard by other people, but you know, the priority is the narrative of the film. We have to tell a story, and when you tell a story, it's not just listening to a transcript of an interview. You're building this narrative. Then the second priority is, well, what's the most immediately cool stuff that, when delivered in chunks, stands on its own, and that becomes a DVD extra. And maybe that means we cut together a 3-minute piece, or maybe it means we just take a chunk of interview and put it out there,
Right.
or whatever. You know, maybe we see, oh, that's a really cool little story. It doesn't fit the narrative, but these 3 people all talk about it, so we can just boop, 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 there it is, and you have a little conversation going, and that goes out there. And then anything else is kind of like these cool random little moments that you have just as part of a conversation, and that stuff maybe we just toss out online as time goes on and as we're able to get to it.
Is that Calamity I hear in the background?
No, that is a child out in the hallway.
Oh, that is not a cat. That is a kid.
No,
Worse.
my cat Calamity is sitting calmly on a chair just off camera, observing all this with the combination of bemusement and disdain.
So all 3 of you guys are filmmakers in your own right and have done your own projects. What brought you guys together for this project?
We'll talk first about ours. So we met Brian because we were promoting our feature film of Dyson Men, which is a dramedy about the lives of 6 role-playing gamers and what happens when one of them enlists to go to Iraq in the 2000s. And so we were promoting our film and met Brian at a convention where he was promoting his film. And that's kind of how we got together. But Brian could talk about his stuff too.
Well, and plus we're huge dorks and
we're also dorks.
D&D gaming dorks, and that's kind of how it all started. Like, hey, we recognize you. You're one of ours.
What's interesting is, so we were at this convention, and I was promoting a documentary I had released called Plastic Galaxy: The Story of Star Wars Toys, and I saw their movie. We started chatting beforehand because when you're an independent filmmaker at a convention that's not geared towards independent filmmakers, you tend to sort of gravitate towards them and be like, oh, what are you doing? And, I realized they did this cool thing about gaming and they were gamers. So we were chatting about that. And I saw their movie and I hadn't played D&D in a while. It had been a few years. Just things got in the way and new editions came out and I kind of lost the thread and I had no one to play with. My friends had moved away. I saw their movie and that came out just as 5th edition was coming out. And that actually inspired me to go check out 5th edition and get back into gaming. So their movie was really funny and really engaging. And it was so accurately captured what it's like to be gaming that it made me really kind of miss it. And I was like, screw any of the things that were keeping me from doing it before. I'm gonna go hunt down this new edition of the game, and that sort of got rolling. So there was a lot sort of tied up in that one weekend. And then when once I started playing, there was so much about D&D where I was like, there's definitely got to be a documentary in this somewhere. And I had looked around and sort of got the lay of the land and was seeing what other people were doing and talking about and realized, like I said earlier, I realized that the art wasn't really being covered and the art was such an important part to me. So the first thing, like once I was sure there was an idea there, I called up Seth and Kelly and we'd sort of stayed in touch since then. I said, hey, I got this idea for a documentary. Would you guys be interested in partnering up on it? And I think you guys jumped on pretty quick. I mean,
Yeah,
of course we
I
did.
thought you're like, all right. And what was cool is I was looking for, I liked the idea that you guys didn't make documentaries. You made narrative films. And I felt like, documentaries are storytelling. They're not just straight reportage. And I wanted to work with people that would be able to bring that to the process, like make it a little bit more than just what I might do on my own with my experiences. Because I have no experience making like real films. You know what I mean? Not that documentaries aren't real films, but making like narrative
films, right?
And so I thought that'd be really cool. So I was really hoping you guys would say yes, not just because you're friends or we had similar interests.
In my professional life, I do a lot of nonfiction work, and so I've always wanted to do documentary work in general, and so this was an opportunity to kind of jumpstart that.
So now they're chatting away in the chat, and they wanted to know what movie you mentioned. It was Of Dyson Men.
Dyson Men.
It's on Amazon Prime.
It's the T-shirt.
Yeah. What's the full title though? Because if you search Of Dyson Men,
the full title is Of Dyson Men. If you look on an Amazon Prime, you'll find it. It's also, if you go to ofdicemen.com, you can also look it up there. It's available online there, and you can order a DVD if you want or anything like that. So, but yeah, you can go to Amazon Prime, just search Of Dyson Men.
And the tagline is a geek movie without the self-loathing.
But that's not the official subtitle. But yeah, we call it a geek movie without the self-loathing. So,
and it's completely child and kid friendly.
Oh yeah, totally. No.
Absolutely not.
It's rated R for language.
If you raise your kid in a biker bar.
Yeah, it's rated R for language. It's full to the brim of adult language, which is kind of accurate for most gaming tables. So the thing about a Dyson Men, that I like is that it's not just about gaming; it's about the friendships of the people. And so that's what it's really about. They just happen to be gamers, and so you kind of see both things in the film. It's for gamers, but it's also about people's relationships.
Right. I mean, look, I'm an attorney. My friends are not well-to-do, but they're all professionals, and we are not the Cheeto stained finger guys living in their parents' basements.
Which is no problem if they're that too. But, yeah.
But we're all. But that's the stereotype. That's the awful stereotype of gamers, right? So we wanted to show gamers as the smart, funny, intelligent people they are, with families, with real lives. And that's, I think, what we accomplished.
Yeah.
Also, Brian, you did Plastic Galaxy as well. Might as well plug that while we're here, so you guys can check that out.
If there are any Star Wars toy fans out there, yeah, Plastic Galaxy, the story of Star Wars toys. I'm really into naming movies in very obvious ways. Like in the subtitle, it's
The Art of Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, because you put the words "Star" and "Wars" in the title of your film in that order.
No, I mean, I once had someone give a review saying that, if you're not into Star Wars toys, I'm not sure what you'd get out of this movie. I'm like, it's in the damn title. It's literally in the title. So I would expect that you wouldn't pick it up if you weren't into Star Wars toys. But,
we actually had an interview. We actually had a review of Dyson Men.
My movie.
Oh, sorry.
That's why I was trying to stop you.
So anyway, it's called Plastic Galaxy, the story of Star Wars toys. It's about the history of Star Wars toys and how they came to be. We interview a lot of the people involved in making them, and some of the people who've written about them, and fans and collectors. And you can find it pretty much anywhere online, from Amazon to Hulu to Vudu, iTunes, PlayStation, Xbox. Apparently we're on some airplanes, which I find sort of shocking and bizarre. But pretty much,
it's also
anywhere.
about Star Wars toys.
It is. In case it's not clear, it's about Star Wars toys. And if you're not into Star Wars toys, you're probably better off just moving right along.
Yes.
It's not the movie you're looking for.
I see what you did there.
Yeah, so in that vein, we actually got a review of Dyson Men that started with, "I don't like role-playing games."
Then why are they watching?
Brian yells
from off
from across
screen.
the room.
Yeah.
Like, really?
Yeah.
All
Well, yeah. People are fun.
Yes.
Yeah, well, spending so much time on the internet,
I'm so
you.
sorry.
I feel you. It's all right. Actually, though, the D&D community, the tabletop role-playing game community, is one of the best communities that you can find anywhere. So that part makes it a lot easier.
I agree.
Occasionally we do these live chats and a cam girl or two will show up, but what are you gonna do?
Well, yes.
Yeah,
Oh, Brian.
And I wouldn't mind if they would just talk about D&D while they're here, whatever.
Doesn't matter.
plenty of people.
So Jason has a question. How do you think art will affect D&D with Twitch merging filming and gaming together, making a call for more graphics like Roll20 and Fantasy Grounds? So everything, all the media seem to be converging. Is I guess what he's talking about.
I think art will continue to be important. It'll just take on a different role. I mean, here's the cool thing. Gaming art in general, but we'll say D&D art because that's what we're talking about, is called upon to do something that very little illustration art is ever called on to do. And that is create an immersive virtual environment. All right. So you have comic books, visual storytelling, and those pictures are there to help tell the story. They're working with the words to move the narrative along. You have book covers, which are usually single images designed to sell the book. They don't always have anything to do with what's inside the book, but they often do. Then you have gaming art. Gaming art is, it's on one hand, it's, okay, you see an ogre. What the hell's an ogre? It looks like this, and you hold up a picture, or a beholder, or an illithid, or whatever. So now the people at the table all are sharing the same idea of what this thing is that they're dealing with. They've created this virtual environment where they can all then plot and scheme and plan and do whatever they have to do to fight this thing, because they all know exactly what it looks like. The other thing it's doing is it is creating, it's the inspiration for what you as a gamer are going to do. So when you go through these books and you see a party of adventurers going through some dungeons, and at the end, at the back of the picture, there's this thing looming out of the shadows. That's telling you as a gamer what's expected of you, and it's getting you to start thinking about the different things that you might encounter, you might do. If you're the DM, things you might plan out. So it's creating this virtual world that you all have to exist in, and no other art does that. So actually, that's not true. Religious art really does that. Religious art, if you're really deep into it, it's this idea of creating a heaven, creating a hell that you can all envision that you're going to be either singing in or roasting in or whatever is going on. But aside from that, which is why our role-playing games are a religion for all of us. There you go. See, that's where it comes together. The thing is, all praise Gygax. When you throw in things like Twitch, and when you throw in things like live streams and stuff like that, the art is only going to become more important. You're literally creating the world. If it's a game that you're playing in virtually, you're literally need to show something on the screen. And then the other part is you've got to keep people engaged. You know, as much as I'm sure people are riveted by our talking heads right here, the truth is you want to see visuals. You want to see what everyone's talking about. So I think it's going to create more opportunities for artists. It's going to create opportunities for different types of artists working in different mediums. It's going to expand the market. It's going to expand the notion of what is gaming art, what is D&D art, the role that it plays. It's only going to help. I think you're going to see animation. You're going to see things that we couldn't do previously because you were limited to books or calendars or whatever. So I think it's really exciting.
Yeah, that was really well put. The other thing I would add about the artwork is it provides a virtual world like Brian was saying, but it's also just inspiration for your gameplay as well. So it gives you a springboard to go off of, so you can say, oh, that's what a tiefling kind of looks like. Okay, well, here's what I'm thinking my tiefling looks like. Mm-hmm. You know, so it's an inspiration that you will always need in the gaming world. I mean, you're always going to need that starting off point.
Yeah, and as the guy that's on the business side of things, the opportunities for artists to create assets for Roll20, to create assets for Twitch, that market's going to take off. It isn't already.
It creates a business. It creates a market where there wasn't one. It's not just expanding the art market as we traditionally think of it, but like you're saying, Seth, it's creating new things that artists can create that previously didn't even apply to the book medium, to the paper medium. You know, animations, stuff like you're talking about. So I think it's really cool. It'll be interesting to see what the next generation does with it.
We as creators, we do a collab channel where we run games and we pay for art on it. So like, you know, you're getting character portraits done, you know, and it's just perpetuating, you know, more ways for people to get involved in the niche and make a living. And even too, like when you're speaking about the art, it really does anchor everybody. And a good example is that we made a small product with, you know, virtually no art in it. And us as the creators, the designers of like the creatures in it, we were talking about one particular creature and each one of us described it differently and how we envisioned it because there's no art for it.
Right.
Well, that's a problem if you're gaming. Let's say Seth and I and Kelly are at the table and the DM says, okay, you encounter a beholder. It's this round ball with an eye and 10 eye stalks and some horns around it. Well, Seth is envisioning one thing, and he's making his plans to attack it based on that. Kelly's envisioning another thing. She's making her plans based on that. And I'm envisioning a third thing, making my plans based on that. Until the DM shows us that, and the DM's picturing a fourth thing, you know? So all of our plans are moot because we're got this thing totally wrong. Because who the hell knows what a beholder looks like? But when he holds up that picture and he says, this is what it is, instantly we're like, okay, we got this. And then we all die because it's a beholder. And what right do we have to be a beholder right now?
Right.
So all our plans were for naught.
So how closely are you guys working together with, you know, putting together the film as far as I know, Kelly, you're doing all
It's all me. They don't do anything.
Look, the restraining orders are very clear on this point. And we can do them 100 miles.
We've got a good workflow going right now. So we're in post-production, fully into post-production at this point since we've wrapped principal photography as of a week ago. So right now I've got the lion's share of it right now just because I'm the editor. But that doesn't mean I'm not taking input from these guys. So they're going through, you know, transcripts, things like that. You're, you know, thinking about ideas for things that can happen in the film. Brian and I are going back and forth about, you know, specific ideas. I just threw out an email last night saying, hey, I've got this idea to how to carry a certain part of the story along. What do you guys think? So we're talking every day, not only because of the Kickstarter, but because of the film progressing itself. So we talk all the time.
And of course, what's going to happen is the final edit's going to be done with about 3 days to spare. And then they're going to throw it to me and say, all right, Seth, do the audio.
Right. Well, yeah, Seth's part comes in when it's time to do the audio from the interviews and do the music and all that stuff. So he's got that coming up. Brian's done, you know, Brian's done the lion's share of the videography for this. He's done, he's done interviews when we couldn't do it. He's done that heavy lifting. Now it's my heavy lifting. Then Seth has his heavy lifting. So, but we're all talking about everything all the time.
And the thing is, we talked a lot about it, like as we're doing the shoots and as we're doing things. So it's kind of like we're all in a similar headspace at this point, where it's like Kelly can put stuff together and she'll toss questions out to us. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? But it's kind of like, I feel very comfortable, at least, just sitting back and letting her run with things, because I know we've had these conversations and I know that she basically knows what I'm interested in having in the film. And I'd rather let her just dive in and deal with the minutia and not kind of be this backseat driver. And as things come together, she'll show stuff to Seth and I. We'll give her our notes. We'll give her our thoughts. She'll tweak or she'll ignore, depending on what we say. And I think that'll help things start to come together. The fact that we've been working on it together this whole time, it's not like Kelly was just some editor who stepped on board at the very end. She's been like a partner in this whole process, means that she knows what we've got. She knows what we're interested in. She knows as a group the things that have kind of risen to the top in terms of topics that we like. And so it's kind of like, all right, she's the editor. It's her art and talent at play.
That said, I text Brian at like 11 p.m. going, what is this monster? What did he say? Because I have never heard of that, because I, of the three of us, am the least experienced in D&D. So I'm like, what the hell is this thing? Or what's the list of influences in the D&D guide? That page of
Appendix N.
Appendix N. I had no idea what Appendix N was, and I hear these people talking about the interviews. I'm like, what the hell is Appendix N? So stuff like that I had to have explained to me, because I'm, not as well schooled.
And then I explain, I'm downstairs. You can just come ask me. It's quicker to text Brian.
Well, no, he was busy. But
it's all right. You can just say you didn't want to talk to him. That's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, so they kind of fill in the blanks for me when I don't know that what somebody is talking about, and then I'm like, oh, okay, now I can move forward. So they help me over those bumps.
So you guys are coming down to the wire. We're getting close to release, correct?
Well, so here's the deal.
Here's the deal.
Really a pinball.
State.
Okay.
So the deal is, we need to submit a very rough cut to Gen Con Film Festival by mid-April to show almost like a proof of concept. There's a thing here. We've got it covered. This is a real movie. We've done all the work.
You should let us into your festival.
Right.
And then we hope that they'll look at it and say, okay, this is cool. We know that you'll have something done by August, which is Gen Con 2018.
Right.
There's no way under those conditions we can submit it for consideration for an award or anything like that. So we're submitting it outside of competition. We don't care about that. We just want to be able to premiere it at Gen Con. Luckily, we've had the conversations with the people who run the festival, and they're like, as long as you show us something, we can make this happen, hopefully. So our goals, we sort of have two goals. One is to just rough something out that shows a beginning, middle, and end, and has a distinct feel for what this thing is going to be. And then after that, we have however many months to just really
not enough
together.
But yeah. So the idea is the cut that we show. I mean, what I'm thinking, I'm confirming with these guys as we speak, is that obviously the cut we turn in by April 15th is just a completed story, from beginning to end. Like Brian said, by no means a finished one, but here's A, B, and C. And then by August, the version we show to Gen Con probably won't still be the final version. It'll probably be, a pretty good version that we're pretty happy with, but we still have room to work from there if we need to. We just want to be able to premiere the pretty good, we're pretty happy with it version at Gen Con. And then we will probably take a step back and do a little bit more refining before we put it out, for public consumption.
Oh, and just a heads up, if you're watching this or listening to this and going to Gen Con, we're planning to do it Saturday night
We think
in a 75-person room.
Yes.
So if the 700 or some Kickstarter backers are any indication, you should probably show up early.
Well, whenever the Gen Con events come out, keep an eye out for it. Keep an eye out for when the film events are released, because hopefully we'll be listed as an event there, and try to get your ticket to that. We'd love to get that room to all 75 filled up, obviously, and we hope that some of the artists that are in the film will actually be at that screening and can do a Q&A afterwards. So that's kind of our plan.
If you're not listed in the event guide, then you know that.
Yeah.
Then something happened. We all exploded. Internally combusted. Everything's done. But yeah, otherwise, I'm hoping that doesn't happen and we actually get things done. So right now, I'm just smashing things into my head and then putting it out onto a timeline at this point. So
it's a wonderful mental picture.
But the big thing that still has to happen that is back on these guys is the B-roll for this is monstrous, because there's 66 hours of interviews plus that we have. Then we have to gather all the art and we have to put it in a way that we can show it to people. And we're doing some, not going to talk about it too much, but we're doing some fancy things with the art for the film that we're hoping will be really cool. And we have to gathering all that art from the old books, from scans, from wherever we can get it, is a huge thing. And then we have other B-roll that is photographs from back in the day at TSR. We've got advertisements, other things that have to do with D&D that we have to pull together to make this something interesting to watch, so you're not just watching a sea of talking heads. So there's a lot of that has to happen in the next several months that is going to be intense. So
I know I'm definitely looking forward to it, and knowing that it's going to be tight, I'm hoping that it works out, that I know a couple people.
Awesome.
Yeah, so Gen Con, Doug will be there, which Brian, I don't think you did meet Doug.
Yeah.
And so did Seth, and then Ted will also be there, so we'll have a good portion of the crew.
Cool. Are you gonna have a table, or are you gonna be mobile?
We're gonna be mobile. People always ask that. I'm like, I don't know. What will we do at a table? I'm like, show YouTube videos.
We do that. At our table.
It's expensive
we'll show videos
too. I mean, it's a $1,500 prospect to show some videos.
Yeah, I find it's easier for us to move around and collect business cards and meet people.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm looking at all of us on screen right now. We've all broken the filmmakers' cardinal rule of wearing black. So we all look like we're sort of disappointed with the backgrounds.
Goth filmmakers.
Oh no recovering goths here.
You're not supposed to wear black. I don't know the rules.
No, if you wear black, the problem is the camera exposes weirdly if there's too much black in the scene. So
no black, no all black, no all white.
Right. Unless you light it properly, you end up looking like everything's blown out because of the all the white, or if people are wearing too much black, you end up being like a floating head in this sort of dark, inky void.
Well, and Dave, you remember before the call, Kelly was running around the room, opening windows and turning lights on and off to fix the light.
Yep. Ideally, I can have a tiny bit of backlight behind me to pull me off the back wall.
Yeah, we don't have our kicker lights going.
What are you going to do?
I don't know. We're about to go into year 5. We've been just winging it.
Hey, whatever works. Whatever works.
We just gotta eyeball it. Does that look all right? I don't know. Let's turn the light this way or that way. Hopefully we'll be able to pick up some tips from Brian.
There you go.
Well, your audio sounds good.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, that part has definitely gotten better. When we started with an iPhone and an external mic. Yeah.
Wow.
So, when people ask me how do you get started in doing the thing, I'm like, I don't know, do it.
That's exactly
the perfect answer to that, to just about anything. Just do it.
Yeah, because you can get paralyzed and being stuck in inertia forever.
Right.
So, is there a master list that you guys had put together of these are the people we want to talk about? I'm imagining a crazy spreadsheet, or maybe a corkboard with strings.
It's in Brian's
Google
head.
Doc.
Yeah,
it's pretty much in Brian's head, and I have to access it through texts.
Yeah, the problem is we started off making a list. Seth and I started putting together a list. We got to about 7 names, and then we were just like, screw it. To a certain extent, it was who can we get?
Right. We couldn't get everybody. There's no way.
Right. Well, no, but even early on, I didn't know who'd respond to us. You
Right.
know, we just talked to Clyde Caldwell. He was the last interview, and he was one of the first people I reached out to, and he originally said no. He said it sounds like an awesome project, totally cool, but I'm not super into being on camera, so I don't know. I'm not really sure. And then as we got everybody else, as we got Larry Elmore, we got Jeff Beasley, we got a friend of his named Chris Arneson to be in it. I came back to him. I said, look, you're the only guy who we don't have from that particular era. It was him, Larry Elmore, Jeff Beasley, and Keith Parkinson. Keith Parkinson passed away, but we talked to his son. So I was like, we've got kind of everyone else in this thing except for you. It's a noticeable hole. It's like, people are going to bug us about this. It seems weird that one of the most prominent artists in the 80s and 90s is not in this movie. So he looked at the stuff we'd done. He looked at our trailers, and he spoke to some of the people that we'd already interviewed. And he said, okay, cool, I'm on board. So the master list kind of grew with like, okay, this person said yes, now they're on the list. Because going into it, it's like everybody's on the list. Let's see who responds.
Well, and Dave, one of the things you mentioned earlier is it's really prevalent here too, that the gaming community is very accepting and open and very friendly. That's doubly so for the art community that's involved in creating this art. As we started going through these interviews, many of these people became our friends. They're people we talk to online like every day. They're our Facebook friends. They're our real life friends. And they started telling their artist friends, hey, these people are making a cool movie. They're good people. We had a great time talking to them. And some of those other artists started to fall in line based on the advice of their peers. It was a wonderful thing, and it's just amazing to see.
Peer pressure works.
Peer pressure. That's the secret.
No, and that's great. So was there anyone that you couldn't get that you really, really wanted to, that you're kind of disappointed for whatever reason?
Brian, anybody?
Not really. I mean, in all honesty, everyone we reached out to said yes. Finally, eventually, it would have been Clyde. I mean, Caldwell would have been that one, but he came around. There are people who are no longer with us who I'd love to be able to interview. I'd love to sit down with Keith Parkinson or Jim
Rosloff,
whoever. But realistically, there are a few people who we didn't reach out to who I admire greatly as artists, but their contributions to TSR, or they're part of their role in the bigger story. They were freelancers, so their role in the bigger story meant we knew we weren't going to use them as much, if at all, versus everybody else we were getting. So we didn't even pursue those interviews. And I'm not going to name them because I don't want anyone to feel bad. But there are a few on that list, that kind of list of people who I personally would love to have met. And I love their artwork, but it didn't make sense for the movie. So we kind of moved on.
There's also the fact that I forbid Brian from arranging any interviews other than Clyde, and who was the one right before that I said, okay, Darlene. We had to get Darlene and Clyde in, and it was just because, we have to get them in. Oh, crap. I wanted to stop interviewing, 6 months ago, but it was because, we had to get, there was people we just had to get, we had to push the deadline back further and further because, cutting off the interviews means I can edit.
Well, here's the tricky thing, David, about making a movie like this. And we all kind of understood this, which is why Kelly was like, okay, we got to get these in. And it's why I was sort of insistent. And what we've got. So on one hand, you've got the people that you want to talk to because they're going to have something good to say. Then there are the people you need to talk to because you don't know what they're going to say, but it's not like a script where we write it out ahead of time or a storyboard where we plan it out ahead of time. We've got to cast a really wide net in the hope that we get good stuff that builds into a story. But on top of all that, and that's something every documentary maker faces, you always have to overshoot because you really don't know what people are going to say. Not always, but often. The other problem, though, is people watching this movie are going to have expectations about who we're going to show. And on a certain level, as a filmmaker, you say, well, it's not about audience expectations. It's about what the story we want to tell. But in this case, it kind of is. If I were seeing a movie about the art of Dungeons and Dragons and I did not see Jeff Easley in that thing, or I didn't see Todd Lockwood or whoever, and there are people who are not in this thing that probably belong on that list as well. But if I don't see a certain amount of people that I expect to see, then I'm going to say, well, did they even
know what they're talking about?
Yeah, exactly. So because of that, there was a like almost a minimal size list that we had to have in order just to simply do the job that this movie is supposed to do. The truth is, we probably could tell the story with like 4 or 5 people, and we'd be fine in terms of, here's the story, A, B, and C, now you know how it all worked. Adding people to that does not tell the story any better necessarily, but what it does do is it lets fans have exposure to these artists who they want to see, they want to hear from. And I do think that's important with a movie like this. So
yeah, it's
forced us to go a little wider than any sane person might have.
Most documentaries, like you were saying, do cast a pretty wide net, but there are a lot of documentaries that I like that only feature a few characters, interview subjects, and they're very focused documentaries, and you find them a lot on serious subjects more than anything else. It's where you're focusing on just a few characters to tell a very clear story. But in this case, I relented to this because that's the kind of documentary I'm kind of used to. But I relented to this because of what Brian is saying is, because of what it is, and because we're making it for the fans of the art and things like that, we had to have that many people involved. There was no way we were going to do a good enough film with 3 or 4 people in it. It had to involve all those people. So,
well, this is also not a movie that follows individual charers.
It's a different style. It's a different style. Yep.
Yeah, and I remember early on, Kelly, you were thinking about it in those terms. Who are the characters? And I was like, well,
right.
The characters aren't really the characters. The characters are more sources.
The character's the art.
Yeah, right. This is much more of a how it's made, if you've ever seen that show. And it's about the subject. It's about
a historical documentary.
It's definitely about the people, but in many ways, these artists are sources providing information about this bigger story. And along the way, you learn a little bit about them. It's not a biography of every artist, because then you would only focus on 1 or 2, the artist, their 2 best friends, and like their spouse or something like that. And you'd really follow them around, and you do this whole kind of follow doc sort of thing. But that's not what we're looking to accomplish. And once we kind of all understood that and we were all comfortable with that, I think these bigger building blocks started to fall into place. Okay,
Absolutely.
We need a million interviews, but on the other hand, we don't have to worry about following each artist for 7 hours with a camera, or weeks. Yeah. So it's much easier in certain ways, it's much harder in others.
Exactly.
The interesting thing about doing a documentary on a subject like Dungeons and Dragons is, one, it's spanned 5 decades, and because you're focusing on this one area that encompasses a lot of different people that worked on it, you're also encompassing several different iterations of the game. With every iteration, they change the art style to make it distinct.
An evolution,
Yeah, so there's almost like these little errors, and I also had a friend who would refer to D&D or tabletop role-playing games as being pieces of Americana. Like they came from here, they didn't really exist, elsewhere. So it's got this like really interesting, timeline and a lot of things that moving pieces that it encompasses.
One of the things that we talked about early on was we didn't want to necessarily have it be this straight timeline. I mean, there's a timeline element to it, obviously, but we didn't want the movie to be this thing that linearly slaves itself to this happened, then this happened, now we're in the 4E years, now we're in the 5E years, and whatever.
Right, we didn't do that.
It was more like, let's look at each topic that comes up, various topics of discussion, and we'll draw from each of these eras to discuss this topic. So if the topic is monster design or whatever, we're looking at all monster design. So 1st edition through 5th edition. In the early days, all this stuff was brand new. They didn't know what the hell a beholder looked like. They didn't know what this looked like, what that looked like. And you had people sort of creating this stuff. in later years, they're building off of style guides because we have 30 years, 40 years, 50 years of this thing existing. But all that's part of the same conversation.
They also didn't worry about things like anatomy and biology as much.
Yeah.
One of the big shifts that's come up a lot. You know, one of the things in particular Todd Lockwood did with third edition was introduce a little more realistic biology to things like dragons. They no longer have shoulders like humans. They don't have grasping hands like humans. They're more cat-like, like the one next to Kelly. And more feline, you know, more like beasts that happen to have these magic powers and intelligence and everything else. And since then, we've seen this shift in dragon design. Some people like it. Some people like older dragons more. I personally don't care. They're all cool. They're all dragons. So that's something you definitely see as a result of sort of people building upon previous designs and previous ideas, and pushing things in different directions. There are other things that we talked about
that's just one thing. Yeah.
Dave, you know, you touched on something a little earlier that I wanted to bring up, and this is funny since I haven't discussed it with Brian and Kelly yet. It's the next big thing that we have to talk about. Thematic arcs for music for the film, right? We haven't talked about, do we want to go rock and roll, classical, synth, whatever,
that's
right?
Coming.
But here's the fun thing, that since you mentioned, hey, there's been a different, very, very, very specific design for each edition. You know, maybe there's something we want to do with first edition gets classical background beds. Second edition gets 70s rock. Third edition gets synth pop, whatever.
Well,
you know,
except we're not moving through it timeline wise. So I don't know if I feel that specific, which is probably why we're
not going to have this argument now.
It's a discussion we need to have, but it's an interesting thing where, you know, there's, as filmmakers, it's something we have to talk about, and we have to figure out what music's going to enhance what portions of the movie and why. And I don't know, do your viewers have any comments on that?
We're not
crowdsourcing our music.
We're not crowdsourcing the edit.
So, you know what though, like that, it does bring up a lot of interesting things. Is how much D&D has influenced culture outside of it. Like the video games we have, the concept of levels and character classes and all of this stuff that's out there.
That's actually the first thing. Just because it happened to be in an interview that I was reviewing, I'm making a list as I go through the interviews of subtopics. Yeah. And so one of those topics is literally D&D and video games. I mean, that's you know, it's just one of those things. D&D art and video games, I should say. Yeah. D&D art and video game. So, you know, it's just one of those many little subtopics that we have to evaluate. Do we put it in the film or not? So, because it's stuff that multiple people have brought up. So.
And, you know, Seth, you bring up music, right? And that's a huge conversation. What kind of music do you play in our games? Are we streaming games, and is there sounds of music in that now? There's bands that have come up basically around Dungeons and Dragons, and they are themed that way. There's other ones where I'm not sure if they were or not, but you think about it, like Manowar is one of the music bands we would listen to a lot, or you know, the soundtrack from Conan or the soundtrack from Gladiators and things like that.
To be clear, we're not going into that stuff in the film just because we can't do all of D&D.
Yeah.
We can only do D&D art, otherwise we'll drive ourselves crazy. But
I mean, one of the things I loved was Stranger Things. You know, their soundtrack is very synth driven.
Yeah.
It's not just like synth pop, it's slightly abstract. It's much more like new wave as opposed to synth pop or new romantic. And I think it works really well. It captures the era. It can be moody when it needs to be moody. It can be light when it needs to be light. It is an aesthetic I personally really enjoy. And it's not necessarily what I would have thought if I were scoring. You know, if someone came to me with Stranger Things, my first thought.
Right.
It's such a Spielbergian movie. You know, some early Spielberg has that type of stuff, but you also, when you think of Spielberg, you think of John Williams. And maybe that was a conversation they had. And I think what they ended up doing was really cool and slightly unexpected, but worked really well to create this kind of weird otherworldly vibe. So the music, you know, I have a lot of trouble with music in documentaries because I never know.
It depends on the documentary. It just depends.
But I always worry, like, is it appropriate to have music underneath people talking? Well, no, I think it is. But I always feel like where and how does that play out and how does it work?
if you go back
I'm not
to
great at it.
what you said, I mean, it's still a story we're telling. So music is supporting the story.
If it enhances good.
Totally.
That's it. It just
I've
depends
seen
what
documentaries where it's used in transition moments and sort of interstitial type moments. And when there are people actually talking, there isn't as much. I've seen other documentaries where the exact opposite. Well, maybe not.
Right. So Dave, you're getting to see this conversation play out right now.
Yes.
No. It's. I think that's what's interesting, and that goes back to the earlier thing I said about wanting to work with more traditional filmmakers, because they're going to bring a perspective to this whole thing that I don't necessarily have, and music is just one area where that's the case.
Just one, yep.
And we don't have any real opinions or anything.
No.
None of us have been musicians our whole lives or anything, or played in bands or anything.
Brian, I'm pointing at Brian and Seth, musicians. Yes.
Yeah. For the last couple of days, I've kind of been like rolling around my head the idea of art, and just in general, and especially D&D art, in the sense that everything in this world tends to evolve, and the more people doing a thing, it just gets better over time. Like someone will always come along and do something better than the best person before. It's just the nature of humans, right?
I don't know if it's always better, but I'll say it's different.
It's different, yeah. Tony DiGiuseppe talks about that in our trailer, how it can be reinterpreted over and over again for each generation, and it's.
Well, I feel like techniques evolve, skill sets evolve, art. So art is tougher because it's more interpretive, right?
Right, but would you say that a Jeff Easley painting is better, in as much as we can make an empirical call and say that a Jeff Easley painting is better than a Da Vinci painting? In the whatever 600 or however many hundreds of years it's been between the two, they certainly are different, and they're certainly, one is built upon the other. Or would you say that
a line drawing on a deities and demigods is better or worse than a modern piece of art, right?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think you can necessarily call that. I mean, Frank Frazetta was working, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Is stuff that comes out now better than Frazetta? No offense to any of the artists who are working today, but I think pretty much most of them would agree nobody is better than Frazetta. They've told me this. I love many of the artists working today, deeply, passionately love their work. And Frazetta was the best.
Yeah, it's very subjective.
It will evolve, though. We'll absolutely agree with you in that it evolves and becomes different.
I mean, there's literally the physical evolving from they did black and white to then they went to color. I mean,
that's partly a function of the mechanics.
Right.
They can print black and color.
Right.
Something like the arts, it's a lot harder to find. But if you look at other areas where you go, okay, a runner, someone will run faster because it's just like you can define it. There's a benchmark, right?
Yes.
But like if I were to hold up all my monster manuals and look at them all together, right? To me, some are clearly better than others. The skill level has advanced. And it might be, and I know there's people that just love the old stuff as well. And there's so much that goes into it.
Here's an important thing, and I just out of an interview I was doing last night, is that it's the sheer volume of artists that you're seeing as well. So they had more people to pick from as time went on. So just the sheer amount of different people's artwork, different perspectives being thrown in the mix just increased, exponentially over the years. So at first they only had 4 artists to pick from. Now they have 400.
There was no deviant art in the 70s.
Yeah.
It's just by sheer volume, you're going to get more interesting things put in the mix because of how many people you're spreading the net to. So
you also have artists. The artists who are starting off were often, they had a lot less training. They were, Diesel was just a kid in high school who drew. He was friends with Ernie Gygax. Mm-hmm. He said, "Do you want a job in our shipping department?" Diesel was like, "Sure." He gets a job in the shipping department, and I think it was Jim Rosloff goes, "Oh, you can draw." Or maybe it was Dave Sutherland. I forget who. But they noticed that Diesel could draw, and next thing you know, he's bumped up to the art department. But he's not someone who had years of training the way Jeff Easley did, or the way Larry Elmore did. And Diesel will be the first to say a lot of it, he was learning on the job. He talks about Jim Rosloff, who was an art director and an artist in the 70s and 80s at TSR, being his mentor. And they'd sit down and he'd show him different ways to ink and different things. So you have a lot of these guys in the beginning who were fans with maybe a little less training versus the guys who are going today. I still think I hesitate to use the word better or worse. Trained versus not trained is legit, and experienced versus not experienced is certainly legit. And there's sort of technical abilities that some have that others don't have. But I know people who will positively throw down. They will fight if you try and say that any of today's art is better than Sutherland's Paladin in Hell, which was this black and white drawing that Dave did in the 70s. And I know others who will completely say, yeah, absolutely, this stuff today is better than Paladin in Hell, whether they love Paladin in Hell or not. It's so subjective, and the circumstances surrounding the art are just so different. It's hard to make that call, I think.
I guess for me personally, I'm the kind of person that could look at two
I will
pictures
stab you if
and say, I like this better, but I recognize this is better. This has been done better. Like there's more skill on this one.
You're latched onto that word better. I think you just
I
have
am.
You have to latch onto the word different.
And what you need to understand is you said, I like this.
Yeah,
better.
it is.
Yeah.
Guess what? Art is in the eye of the
Oh,
beholder.
no.
Yeah.
this is Paladin in Hell. I don't know if
There's Paladin from Hell.
people are
Yeah.
going to be able to see it clearly. Dave Sutherland, done in 78, I guess, 79. And it is a pretty simple black and white drawing. It is not nearly as complex as you're going to get from some of the black and white artists or some of the people working today, but it evokes so much. I used to look at this as a kid, and I still feel today, the sort of lonely nobility of this one paladin in hell fighting literally every single devil that they created in D&D. You've got spine devils and the frost devil. I don't know what the hell that thing is.
Brian is now full geeking out.
I mean, it's there's a lot of power there, even if technically the rendering isn't necessarily as tight or realistic or however you define good as someone rendering it today.
And one other thing, remember that you're seeing a published version of an artwork versus the oil painting of that artwork.
Yeah. Well, or
So,
black and white.
right, but I'm just
Actually
saying, like I'm talking about, some of the older
Yeah.
color work, like, in the interviews, people have talked about, how different it is to see the real painting versus what you see printed on the page. It's like a whole other level of thing to be able to see the brush strokes and, stuff like that. So you're missing some of the nuances with some of that older artwork too. The artwork itself was actually, very technically good. It's just, maybe the printing didn't give it as much of a good show as maybe in person it would. That's just one little part of it. But
Go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say another part of it is there are sort of two components to art. There are many components to art, but I think there are two components to art that most immediately hit people. One is how it's rendered, the literal quality of the drawing. So if you're going for realistic, how realistic is it? If you're going for abstract, how sort of interesting or engaging on an abstract level is it? And that shifts depending on the type of painting. The other thing, though, is what does art do when you see it? Do you feel it? In the case of D&D art, is it telling a story? And those two things are not necessarily always in line with each other. You could have something that's rendered quote unquote poorly, but you still look at it and are like, oh man, that really hits me in the feels, that it's doing something. The old player, so we have two players handbooks. So we have this one by Dave Trampier, and this was the very first edition player's handbook. And then they recovered it in the early 80s with one of Jeff Easley's paintings. And Jeff Easley is an amazing artist. So is Trampier, but Easley maybe has a little bit more skill as a painter. But the thing is, this Trampier picture or painting captures D&D at its essence. And a lot of people cite this as one of their favorite pieces of art because you've got these adventurers. It's right after a campaign. You've got these adventurers down here and they're lugging off these dead lizard men. You've got this stone idol. You've got these thieves up here who are prying the gem out of the stone idol's eyes. On the back, you can see they're like dragging off some more of the bodies in this giant cavernous area. I mean, that's literally what we do as gamers and as D&D players. We are murder hobos. We are going through, and this art really captures it. Now, is it rendered as tightly or realistically or as whatever as Jeff Easley's? It's not. It really isn't. But it has so much other stuff going on that makes it such a really great and powerful piece. I mean, I love it, even though I look at the Easley and I'm like, yeah, that's technically much, on a technical level, it's certainly much tighter. So it's all those different things coming into play. We're big proponents of the sort of egalitarian approach to art through the ages of D&D. We really love it all, which is sort of why we wanted to get all of it in.
No, I am right there with you. And it's like you held up the first one, that's iconic. You held up the second one, I'm like, that was my player's handbook, right?
True.
Like,
True.
I'm like, oh, I still want him to hold it up and open it because mine, the pages would have fallen out. They were terribly bound back then.
This isn't the one I actually owned as a kid, so
No, not that one. They were made better. The first printing was better. It was the second printing, first edition, that the books all fell apart. And when 5th edition came out and the books were doing the same thing, I was like, they're really trying to capture the old nostalgia.
Right. It fell apart just like my original. Yay!
Yeah.
What are you going to do? Well, we are past the hour mark. Unfortunately, this always goes by so fast. And there's a couple questions I'm sure I didn't get to, guys. I'm sorry. But go check out the Kickstarter. Follow these guys.
And if these guys have questions, they want to send us a message through the Kickstarter or drop us a line through our website, eyeofthebeholdermovie.com. You can
Facebook.
Contact us there and ask those burning questions, and we might answer.
Yeah, as always, I have in the description, I have the website, some socials, your Kickstarter, so they'll be able to reach out to you, ask whatever questions they want to ask, make sure their favorite artist was in there, and if not, why did you skip them? I remember Brian talking about that a little bit.
FAQ, we have a thing saying,
yeah, matter of fact, why isn't so-and-so in the film? Yeah.
We've answered that
over and over again. But no, it's awesome. I'm excited for this project that you guys are working on. I can't wait to see it. I know it's going to be amazing. I've seen all of your work before. I've been really happy with it. So thank you for coming on. Thanks everyone for watching. Until next time, folks, stay nerdy.
Bye.
Bye.